Hello. Thank you for joining us today for the first session of 2024's Legal Strategies for Women Leaders. My name is Mindi Johnson. I'm an attorney here at Foster Swift and a co-leader of our firm's business tax practice group. As you may know, the idea for this program developed during a lunch meeting of several Foster Swift women attorneys. The discussion uncovered that many of the firm's female business clients are increasingly busy and may appreciate focused discussions on specific legal issues that affect them directly. As a result, this program was created and is intended to help women business leaders stay abreast of new laws, regulations, and other beneficial resources. A primary purpose of the program is to educate attendees and emphasize that it's not up to one person to ensure the success of a business. Instead, it takes a team of different professionals to get the work done and help a business to thrive. To that point, today's program is informational and not legal advice. This is the first of 4 sessions scheduled for this year. Each session will provide ample time for participants to ask questions, discuss legal opportunities, and problem-solve challenges that women leaders face. If you have questions, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. This session is being recorded, and we will email a link to you following the program, along with answers to any questions that we did not have time to address today. We want to be respectful of your time, so we will limit the session to 30 minutes. In today's discussion, we will hear from attorney Mallory Reader. Mallory is an attorney with our firm's municipal practice group and is located in our Grand Rapids office. In addition to helping local units of government with their legal issues, she also practices in the areas of administrative law, licensing, and election and campaign finance law. Before entering private practice, Mallory worked for a prominent Washington, D.C. think tank, where she authored amicus briefs on topics of individual rights and administrative agency power. As you can appreciate, Mallory's time in Washington exposed her to a variety of political issues like campaign finance, which is the topic of today's discussion. With that, Mallory, thank you for joining us. Should we get started?
Yes, thank you for having me, Mindy.
You're welcome. Always a fun topic, especially during a presidential election year, to talk about campaign finance, politics, and everything that entails. I suspect that a lot of people will be asking questions about political contributions. So let's start by talking about some of the ones that you're hearing about. Initially, what are your thoughts? Can businesses donate money?
So it really depends, which is a lawyer's favorite answer. But there are really 2 ways to spend money on political campaigns or political causes, and those would be expenditures and contributions. And the difference between those 2 ways of spending money really matters. So contributions are what we typically think of when we talk about donating to campaigns. Contributions are gifts, donations, payments, loans, or something similar that is given to someone else. So that's key. You're giving the money to someone else to spend. Expenditures, on the other hand, are also payments, donations, loans, but they're ones that you are spending on behalf of or against a candidate or a ballot question. And you'll often hear these referred to as independent expenditures because the spending is done independently of that candidate or the campaign. So corporations are prohibited from making contributions to candidates, meaning your corporation cannot write a check to an individual candidate or their campaign. But corporations can make contributions to ballot question committees or independent expenditure committees. And then corporations can also make independent expenditures on their own.
Now, when we're talking about those type of contributions, payment for expenditures, are there any limits on the amounts?
So for corporations, there are no limits on the amount that you can contribute to ballot question or independent expenditure committees. And there are no limits on the amount of money you can spend on independent expenditures on your own. But there are some disclosure rules that kick in once you hit a certain threshold. For example, once a corporation receives or spends more than $500 for expenditures, it then must register as a committee. But even before you get to that $500 threshold, there are some reporting requirements you'll need to comply with. So it's best just to talk to someone before making any expenditures to make sure that you are disclosing what you need to disclose.
Do you think it's just a rule of thumb that once you're thinking about the $500 mark, that's kind of the threshold for asking those types of questions?
Definitely. I think, ideally before you even spend or receive a dollar, you're asking those questions. But, as soon as you're starting to see that $500 creeping up, you definitely need to talk to someone.
Compliance is always important, and we as lawyers will constantly advise clients in that regard. So good to know. Can businesses spend money for candidates?
So this kind of goes back to that difference between a contribution and an expenditure. And as I already mentioned, contributions, giving money to the candidate, that's not allowed. Expenditures or spending money on candidates is allowed, but they must be independent. And so that means the candidate, their campaign, their friends, they cannot direct how that money is being spent. If your business wants to run an advertisement encouraging the election of a candidate, you can do that, but you can't consult with the campaign on where to run it, what the ad says, for how long to run the ad, etc.
What about donating items or services? Can businesses do that?
So when you're donating an item or a service, those are called in-kind contributions. And there's a monetary value attached to those services or items. Again, those would be considered contributions. So while a business can give them to ballot committees or PACs, they cannot give it to candidate committees.
Got it. And we've talked about campaign committees and PACs. Do businesses need to create a separate entity for campaign purposes if they're thinking about making contributions?
So that $500 threshold is going to come up again once your corporation hits that $500 mark. Then it must establish an independent expenditure committee. That's what we commonly refer to as a PAC or a political action committee. So having that as a separate entity of your corporation will then allow that entity to continue to make expenditures that align with your corporation's interests. But even really before that happens, your corporation should have a separate segregated fund for political purposes. And that's essentially a bank account for your political money, and it's kept separate from your corporation's general fund. And that will make it easier for you to make those financial disclosures because everything is already separated.
So is that separate account different from a PAC? And if so, how do you go about creating a PAC?
So it is separate, but a PAC should have one. But to actually create the PAC, it's pretty simple. You file a statement of organization, and depending whether your committee is focused on a local ballot question or a statewide issue, then that will determine whether you file that statement with the Secretary of State or with your local county clerk. And that statement is it's a one-page form, fill in the blank. It asks for things such as the name of your committee, who the treasurer is, an address, really just some basic contact information, and you'll file that, and then your PAC is formed. But again, that $500 limit keeps coming up because as soon as you hit the $500 limit, you have 10 days to file that, and it's 10 calendar days, not business days. So if you know that you're going to be heading in that direction, you can file it before you hit that 500 mark, and that way your committee is already established.
So we talked about this $500 threshold and what happens if you don't hit it or if you don't file the right paperwork on time. Is there really a penalty if you violate some of these campaign finance laws? And if so, how much trouble are you going to be in?
So a good amount of trouble. It seems like every section of the Campaign Finance Act has its own penalty associated with it. For example, that prohibition on corporations making contributions to candidates, knowingly violating that is a felony, which can result up to, I believe it's 3 years in prison, $5,000 in fines. And then if the corporation itself is found guilty, the corporation can be fined $10,000 as well. And those are pretty similar amounts for the different, sections of the Campaign Finance Act and the different violations. So there are some hefty fines and some possible, jail time involved if it's an individual violating those. Again, that's just why it's really important to consult with someone before you start spending money for political purposes. Another example is, once you're a committee, once you're spending money like that, there are certain financial disclosures you have to make. And the deadlines vary based on whether it's an election year or not. So, again, it's best just to talk to someone to make sure that you're filing those on time to avoid the late fees. If you have multiple late filings, that can also incur additional penalties and possible criminal charges.
I always love when I get a phone call from a client and they start out with, Mindi, please tell me I'm not going to jail for this.
Yeah.
I think it instills the same concept that you're talking about. At least take some proactive measures to understand what the rules are. And when you suspect that you're approaching some of those key decisions, consult with a trusted advisor. Give Mallory a call just to make sure compliance is on the up and up and you're doing everything right. So you avoid jail time, avoid some of those significant penalties.
Exactly. Yeah. Campaign finance is highly regulated. It's taken very seriously, making sure that you're disclosing what you need to disclose and that you are giving in ways you're allowed to give. So it's really just important that you are crossing your T's and dotting your I's when it comes to these things.
Now, I would also assume that scrutiny is probably heightened during key election years like 2024. Is that what you're seeing too in your experience?
Yeah, anytime it's a presidential election year, probably more so than the midterm years, but states, especially Michigan, they really care about making sure that there's no impropriety going on, or even the appearance of someone doing something they're not supposed to do, just for having integrity in the election. So the state will take this seriously if you are violating the law.
All right. I appreciate that every business is different and the political activity of employees within a business might vary across the industry, across the size of the business, and across the country. So we did want to save a few minutes here just to accept some questions for the audience. And I'm just scrolling through now to see what we got. And we do have one question. So we'll start with that one, Mallory, if you're willing.
Of course.
We often get asked to host political fundraisers in our business office meeting space. What are best practices for these types of political fundraising events?
I would have to know more about the specifics to really give you good answers. So feel free to contact me and maybe that's something we can talk about. But a lot of it would depend on, is this a space that they are paying to rent, or are you donating the space to them to rent? If you're donating the space and that's something you would normally charge rent for, then it could be considered an in-kind contribution. And so that's something you would definitely want to consult an attorney about.
Mallory, I was wondering too, if a business owner or president of the company is hearing a lot of employees start asking about political contributions, is that the time to start thinking about creating a PAC or a segregated fund and then engaging employees to continue discussions in that regard?
Yep, definitely. So once you do form an independent expenditure committee, you can solicit contributions to that committee from certain employees. So, there's a whole list of who you can and cannot ask or suggest that they contribute. And that's something I'd be happy to talk about with a potential client. But yeah, if your employees seem interested in it, maybe it's about question that is really specific to your industry, that might be a good time to start thinking about forming a committee.
Advice. All right. We'll wait just one more minute here to see if we get some questions through the chat feature. If not, at the end of this presentation, we will be sending additional information and certainly Mallory's contact information. So we welcome any of the attendees of this session to contact Mallory directly. And I hope I'm not being too bold as to offer her advice or listening ear, but she always is very good about answering those phone calls and helping people navigate some of these difficult questions.
Yeah, definitely. Feel free to reach out. I think my email and phone number are in the chat. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Mallory, for your expertise and willing to share with this group today. I also want to thank all of our attendees who came to this session this morning for the Legal Strategies for Women Leaders. As we mentioned before, we'll be sending a link to today's recording to you afterwards, as well as a short survey. We always value your feedback and look forward to providing valuable programming. The scheduled topics for the rest of 2024 include an artificial intelligence presentation in June, a business mediation presentation in October, and a back to school strategies and child-focused issues in August. So as we wrap up, the screen should be showing a list of the firm's women attorneys, their areas of practice and contact information. This will also be included in the link if you have any other questions, as will Mallory's contact information. So again, we welcome you to reach out to her directly with anything that you'd like to discuss.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I just wanted to have one more plug too. As women professionals, we always value the opportunity to network and do business with other women leaders. That's why we're so focused on presenting to women leaders and having hosts who are women attorneys from our firm. So please consider this an open invitation to reach out and connect with any one of us, including Mallory. And again, thank you. And we look forward to seeing all of you at our next session.